Hello everybody. The borders are now open in Morocco to a lot of countries, including France, a lot of Europe and the United Kingdom. But of course it's quite difficult to get back to the UK at the moment because we're still on the amber list there. But we are beginning to see a few tourists arriving, and that is good. And people are starting to look with optimism to the future, and that has to be good. But it did strike me that at times of absolute disaster, and I'm meaning really huge disasters, for example, during the Second World War, when it was over, you'd have young children coming up and saying, "Daddy, what did you do during the war?" And I remember that during the miners' strike in the United Kingdom, it was often said, "What will you say when your children said, 'What did you do during the strike?'" And equally during the pandemic, I'm sure our children in the future will say, "What did you do during the pandemic?" And I've given that quite a bit of thought. And I can look anyone in the eye and say that during the pandemic, we did what we now see as almost impossible. We have taken animals we never believed would be in the state they're in. We haven't said no to an animal unless it was absolutely necessary and it was too far away to get to Georgia. Our numbers doubled, but our workload trebled. We had to build stables. We're looking after horses. So, of course, our feeding programme is 3 times what it was because, of course, horses are so much more expensive to feed. And somehow we have coped. But the pandemic isn't over for us. When the tourist industry starts to fly again, and we will support them to the hilt, and to all the artisans and the incredible people in Morocco, we are left with the aftermath of the pandemic because our animals are still injured, many with broken legs, and they're not going to go away. But I'm really proud of what our people here have done during the pandemic. And we have been able to keep, as I've said before, 15 people in work. That's 15 families. That possibly means 30 or more in the village. And hopefully we have contributed to keeping the village alive. And we again appreciate the help we have had from abroad. We couldn't have done it without that. We appreciate some of the companies here in Morocco who will send us a donation every week. There aren't many, but there are some. And to be fair to those companies, I'm going to start listing on my website who they actually are. So when you come back to Morocco, you will know there are people there who stood by us even when their own future was in doubt. And that is just amazing. And then I brought to mind 2 events over the last 3 or 4 days. You will have seen that we lost a mule, Dominica, who had come from Imlil, from the mountains. She was found in a hotel and brought to us, and she really wasn't fit to work anymore. But she spent, I think to be fair, 6 years with us. I thought it was 7, but to be fair, it may only be 6. But of course, we've loved having her, and people got to know her very well. But the reality is, and I've been asked to say this to you by other people, Dominica being cared for at Georgia has cost £6,000. It costs £1,000 a year to keep a mule and £800 to keep a donkey. And Pepe, when he came yesterday, his new owner who bought him and was going back to Italy, at one point some of the men had come back from lunch and he said, "Oh gosh, do those men work here?" And I said, "Yes, 15 people work here." And there was a slight look of surprise. And I had to say, we need them and we're still short-staffed. We have nearly 40 stables to muck out in the morning. We feed them 4 times a day. That we don't have grass here, so they have to be fed 4 times a day. And there are lots of hooves to treat, medical work to be done, a lot of driving to be done. And I realise that during the pandemic, we have really found out who our friends are. The ones who've responded regularly, the ones that have encouraged us. And my mind went back, just one example. A donkey came here, it must be 3 knocking on 4 years ago, from the Medina. He'd worked in the Medina. He was in quite a good state of health, but he'd become lame. And he used to pull a cart to a hotel in the Medina, and prior to that, he'd pull carts and helped many of the riads with their restoration work. And in those days, we were able to send a donkey to Spanner to be gelded. We do our own now, by the way. And he went to Spanner and he was gelded, and he came back here, and he still seemed to be very lame. And what we did was we took his rubber shoes off him, and we found underneath, because he was just wearing rubber shoes, so it would be quiet in the Medina at night, trotting past the riads where all the tourists are sleeping. You can imagine it, can't you? And once we took these rubber shoes off, his hoof was rotten. No one had checked his feet. He's fine now, and he lives here very happily. He's still quite a young donkey. But that riad who sent him to us said, please would we take him? And of course they'd make a donation. We've never seen a donation. And I think it's about time we came clean over these sorts of things. I think it's fair that I actually begin to tell the truth, because quite a lot has been buried. It's good to see that people are coming back to life again. Gosh, they'll be organising parties soon. But where was everybody when the donkeys were coming in really sick? Some people felt they couldn't visit because it would be too upsetting. Well, I promise you, no one who's ever visited here has left upset. They may have cried while they were here to see what we do, but they never left upset. The really good thing is that we are building up a new community here in Marrakech, and a lot of French people who have stayed here during the pandemic are now visiting and have been wonderful. And of course, we have the support of the Mamounia Hotel, because we took their donkey when he was had his leg crushed by a lorry. And other avenues and doors have opened. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that everyone should visit us. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying to you is the pandemic has been enlightening. We have discovered things that have surprised us, and we've been disappointed, at times very disappointed. But we're all still here, and we will carry on. And when those of you abroad are able to visit Morocco again, you will have such the warmest welcome here. And we hope here at the refuge that times get better as well, and that the awful suffering many of these abandoned animals go through at the moment will improve. So thank you for listening.